Our next question comes from Calvin Henderson.
Awesome. So I'm Calvin Henderson. I'm a level 3 CFA candidate and analyst at Innova Wealth Partners. I have a non-technical question for you, and it's about the CFA program because, at this point in my CFA career, you realize very quickly you're exposed to this huge amount of information across a bunch of topical areas. And especially if you're really interested in finance, you kind of go off that, do your own reading and learn more about derivatives and this and that. When you're actually out working in the field in a given role, you're not going to be using a lot of that knowledge on a daily basis. And sometimes it gets very difficult to actually communicate with others, that you work with, friends and family, anyone you interact with where the markets come up. So the question I have for you is kind of a two-parter. Number one, how much of your CFA background knowledge do you typically use on a daily basis in your role today? And number two, how do you sort of translate your understanding of these topics into something that makes sense to others, but also still reflects your own thinking on the subject?
I'm going to answer your questions backwards, and I'm scatterbrained. So if I forget the first question, you're going to have to remind me by the time I get to the end of the,
it's all good.
Second part. I would say if I can give folks one piece of advice in this session is, without knowing you, I am going to guess that you over-rotate to Excel and coding and technical skills, and you under-rotate to being a very effective communicator. So if I were to really focus my energies somewhere, I would make sure I can write. And that might sound completely illogical in an era of technology and increasing automation. But at the end of the day, business is about relationships. And in order to forge, to get an introduction, to make an introduction, to really build relationships, you need to know how to communicate with people. And the baseline of that is obviously good spelling and grammar, but that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking more about communication, expressing, demonstrating empathy, understanding that business is not a zero-sum game. It is a positive-sum game. One of the best interactions I had, probably goes back 10 years ago to there's actually a course I took on not-for-profit boards, was with, at the time, a senior sales executive at Cisco. And I was talking to him about how he makes a sale. And we were actually in a restaurant having a drink. And he's like, at the end of the day, I would walk into a place like this and I would look around and I would say, hey, I understand the vision for your business and this is what you're trying to do. And if this is what you're trying to do, here's where my solutions come in. He's like, but just as many times he'll walk into a place and say, I'm not the solution for you, actually. I think I'm too expensive and I want to see you do well and I want to see you succeed. I would suggest that for the problems that you're trying to solve, you go in this direction. And if there's a way that I can help you along on your journey, reach out to me. You can only do that if you know how to communicate. So if I think about the second part of your question, I think I think one of the problems that plagues the financial industry is people are intimidated by finance, and I think they find a lot of the terms confusing. But there's one thing true about finance that is true about everything else. Nobody likes to be made to feel stupid, right? So I always use the example of, I don't know anything about cars, but I mean, you guys are in Sudbury. Like, it snows in Toronto, believe it or not, and I've got to put on winter tires. I don't really know anything about cars. And when it comes time to do that transaction, I go, even though I've moved a couple of times and the business has moved, I go out of my way to a business 20 minutes further than I need to, because I trust them and because they've always had my back and they're very good at communicating what I need to do and why. And it's all in the communication. All right. So that's how I would say, like, the financial industry, unfortunately, I think a lot of people are intimidated by it. And when someone asks a question, the truth is, I think you just have to kind of demonstrate care. What is really the question? If somebody really wants to talk to you about a stock, you're probably not going to be able to talk them out of that stock. You might want to ask them why they're so interested in that stock. That's a very different question from someone asking how do they build a budget or a financial plan. And true to form, I think your first question was about the CFA. And the CFA is really interesting. The educational experience I had at the University of Toronto was absolutely amazing. The CFA, though, I learned more in the CFA than I have in any other educational, whatever the word would be here, approach or endeavor. I had a very different approach to studying maybe than some people. I read every page of every textbook because I wanted to absorb it. So I never would have got my job with RBC Capital Markets. I never would have got my job with RBC Wealth Management. And believe it or not, for my current job, I would not have been able to get this job. And the reason is I am the lead portfolio manager of this business. I'm what's called, from a regulatory perspective, the ultimate designated person. And in order to be registered for that portfolio manager position, I need to have my CFA with not just work experience, but with very specific work experience. And I would not have got that work experience in my last job were it not for my CFA. The CFA is very intense. There's a lot of information there. You may not necessarily need it for the path that you want to go in your career. You'd be surprised, though, how much of that information you will remember and you will apply. So I would say, the idea that you'd be surprised how much you don't use, to some extent, I would say that applies more to my economics degree than my CFA. With the CFA, you'd be surprised how much, I am still surprised how much I do use. And I've had I finished the third level of the CFA in 2001, so it's been 20 years.
That's an amazing answer. I mean, like, my experience with the CFA has been very similar to yours as well, with opening up doors, the amount of education that you receive. And what I found really interesting was when he mentioned communication skills, it made me think of Warren Buffett and his Dale Carnegie course, how he said that's, the most important experience he ever had, becoming a better communicator. It was a really good answer. Thanks.